Welcome. It's time to settle down. Dim the lights, relax, and just listen. Let the rain outside, or maybe the quiet inside, set the mood. We have an hour of unsettling tales ahead, stories gathered from the shadows. Make sure you're comfortable. Our first story starts now. It wasn't meant to be anything special, just a weekend clearing out the attic of the house my parents had recently inherited from a distant, somewhat eccentric great-aunt. The place hadn't been touched in decades, thick with dust and the smell of stale memories. Up amongst the cobweb-draped furniture and forgotten boxes, tucked away in a battered leather trunk, I found it, a vintage zoetrope. It was one of those old Victorian-era animation toys, a metal drum on a wooden base with slits cut into the sides. Inside was a paper strip illustrated with figures designed to look like they were moving when the drum spun. This one was different, though. The illustrations weren't charming ballerinas or galloping horses. They depicted strange, gaunt figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, performing some kind of slow, ritualistic dance. The artwork was intricate, unsettlingly detailed. Despite the creepiness, it was fascinating. I carefully packed it and took it home, setting it up on a bookshelf in my study. For a few days, it was just a curio, a conversation piece. Then the quiet disturbances began. I'd be working late at my desk, the only light coming from my monitor, and I'd hear it, a faint, rhythmic clicking sound from the direction of the bookshelf. Click, click, click. Slow, metallic, like a clockwork mechanism struggling to turn. Each time I looked up, flashlight beams sweeping across the shelf. The zoetrope was perfectly still. The sound would stop the moment I focused on it. Dismissing it as the house settling or my imagination playing tricks became harder when other things started happening. Objects near the zoetrope would be slightly moved overnight. A pen rolled off the shelf. A stack of papers subtly shifted. Then came the whispers, faint, sibilant sounds, seeming to emanate from that corner of the room, just on the edge of hearing. Impossible to decipher, but they carried a feeling of cold malice. My cat, usually bold and curious, started avoiding the study altogether. She'd sit in the hallway, staring intently at the doorway, sometimes letting out a low, guttural hiss before backing away. One night, the clicking sound was louder, more insistent. I crept towards the bookshelf, phone camera ready, hoping to catch whatever was happening. As I got closer, the clicking stopped, but I noticed something else. The paper strip inside the drum, it wasn't the one with the gaunt figures anymore. It showed a different scene. A crude, almost childlike drawing of a house, my house, with thick, dark lines scribbled over the windows. And standing in front of the house was a single, tall, stick-like figure with empty sockets for eyes. My blood ran cold. Where had the original strip gone? Who could have possibly changed it? I reached out a trembling hand towards the zoetrope. As my fingers brushed the cold metal, the drum started to spin. Slowly, jerkily, all by itself. Click, click, click. Through the slits, the stick figure in front of the house seemed to turn its head, its empty sockets fixing on me. The whispering started again, louder now, swirling around me, feeling like icy breath on my skin. I snatched my hand back, stumbling away from the bookshelf. I should have thrown it out then, smashed it, burned it. But there was a morbid fascination, a need to understand. The next evening, I forced myself back into the study. The zoetrope was still. The illustration strip inside showed the original gaunt dancing figures again. Had I hallucinated the other strip? The spinning? I decided to try spinning it myself. I gave the drum a gentle push. It rotated smoothly, and through the slits, the figures performed their eerie dance. Round and round they went, but as I watched, mesmerized by the flickering animation, the background behind the figures seemed to change. It wasn't just a plain paper strip anymore. It looked like the inside of my study, my desk, my chair, the pattern on the rug. And standing amongst the gaunt dancers, partially obscured, was another figure, small, huddled in the corner of the animated scene. A figure that looked disturbingly like me, cowering. Then, from behind me in the actual room, came a sharp, loud crack. I spun around. Nothing, just the silent room. But the air felt heavy, charged with static. I looked back at the zoetrope. It had stopped spinning. The paper strip inside was now completely blank. White, empty paper. That's when I finally understood. It wasn't just showing things, it was taking them, erasing them. The original strip, the drawing of my house, the animated version of me gone. What was it doing with them? What was it feeding on? I grabbed the zoetrope, ran outside, and smashed it against the pavement. Metal bent, wood splintered. I kicked the pieces into the gutter, but the relief didn't come. Back inside, the study felt wrong. Empty but watched. The whispers haven't returned. The clicking is gone. But sometimes, when I look at the spot on the bookshelf where it used to sit, I feel a phantom coldness. And I can't shake the feeling that a piece of me is still trapped inside that broken drum, dancing forever with those gaunt, hollow-eyed figures. Started subtly, the way these things always seem to. I work remotely as a data curator, basically tidying up massive datasets for AI training. My project for the last few months involved sorting and tagging images scraped from defunct forums and old GeoCities pages. Digital archaeology, mostly tedious. My workstation is in the spare bedroom of my apartment, overlooking a perpetually gray courtyard. The first oddity was the cache misses. My software usually prefetches images smoothly, but it started lagging, showing placeholder icons before the actual image loaded. Annoying, but I chalked it up to network congestion or server issues. Then came the wrong images. Instead of a pixelated GIF of a dancing banana, I'd get a fraction of a second flash of something else. It was too fast to register consciously, but it left a residue, a feeling of unease, like seeing movement in your peripheral vision. I decided to run a diagnostic, checking the temporary files folder where the prefetched images were stored. Trawling through the alphanumeric soup of file names, I found them. Mixed in with the expected web detritus were images that didn't belong. They weren't random, they seemed curated. There was one of a single worn leather shoe sitting on a wet pavement, curb glistening under a streetlight. Another showed a child's swing set, chains rusted, one seat missing, silhouetted against a dawn sky. A third was a close-up of peeling paint on a windowsill, the wood underneath dark and stained. They were mundane, yet deeply unsettling. No people, no context, just isolated fragments that felt heavy with unspoken narrative. They all shared a similar aesthetic, slightly desaturated, grainy, like stills from a forgotten film reel. I deleted them, cleared the cache, even ran a malware scan. Nothing. The system came back clean. But the next day they returned, mixed with new ones. A cracked teacup on a checkered floor. A door slightly ajar, revealing only darkness within. A single, bare light bulb hanging in what looked like an empty room, casting long shadows. It felt like someone or something was feeding these images into my cache. The flashes within the software became more frequent. Sometimes I thought I saw my courtyard in them. The brick pattern, the specific way moss grew on the north-facing wall. I'd snap my head up, look out the window, just the usual gray emptiness. Was I imagining it? Sleep deprivation, maybe? Then came the sound files. My curation software didn't handle audio, yet .wav files started appearing in the cache folder alongside the images. Short snippets, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps on gravel, a rhythmic dripping noise, a faint, staticky whisper that I couldn't quite decipher, but that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I was getting seriously freaked out. I backed up my essential work onto an external drive, disconnected the workstation from the network, and decided to take the rest of the day off. I needed fresh air, perspective. I went for a walk, aimlessly wandering the city streets for a couple of hours, trying to shake off the paranoia. When I returned, The workstation was off, which was odd since I'd just put it to sleep. I powered it back on. The usual boot sequence began, but then it stalled. A single image filled the screen. It was my front door, taken from the hallway outside. The angle was slightly low, as if held by someone crouching. The lighting matched the dim, flickering bulb in my apartment building's corridor. And embedded in the image, watermarked faintly in the corner, was a timestamp. It was from 10 minutes ago. While I was out, my blood ran cold. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been outside my door. Someone who somehow had access to my disconnected workstation. How? Then, the image on the screen changed. It was the view from my workstation window, overlooking the courtyard. But it wasn't the current view. It was nighttime in the picture, and down in the courtyard, partially obscured by shadow, stood a figure. Tall, indistinct, perfectly still, looking up. Towards my window, a new sound file automatically played through the speakers, overriding the system mute. It was the faint, staticky whisper from before, but clearer this time. Just one word, repeated softly, chillingly. Found. I ripped the power cord from the wall. The screen went black. Silence flooded the room, thick and suffocating. I stood there, shaking, heart pounding against my ribs. Disconnected, powered off. It didn't matter. It wasn't just in the cache anymore. It knew where I was. I backed away from the desk, eyes darting towards my apartment door, towards the window overlooking the courtyard. How long had it been watching? How long until it decided to do more than just leave digital artifacts? I'm still trying to figure out where to go, but every time I close my eyes, all I see are those grainy, unsettling images, and I hear that whisper. My apartment wasn't exactly isolated, but being on the top floor, corner unit, gave it a certain sense of detachment, especially late at night, when the sounds of the city faded, and the building itself seemed to hold its breath. I'm a musician, mostly composing ambient electronic stuff, so I keep odd hours, often working deep into the night when inspiration strikes. The silence was usually my ally, until it wasn't. It started with scratches. Not mice, I'd had those before. This was different. Faint, rhythmic scratching sounds coming from outside my apartment door, out in the supposedly empty hallway. Scritch, scrape, scritch, like fingernails dragging lightly across the wood. It only happened late, usually after 2 a.m. The first few times, I'd open the door, peering into the dimly lit, carpeted corridor. Nothing. The scratching would stop the instant the deadbolt turned. I tried to rationalize it. The building settling, pipes contracting, wind whistling through a crack under the door. But the sound was too specific, too deliberate, and it always stopped when I checked. Then came the tapping, not on the door, but on the shared wall between my living room and the neighboring apartment. An apartment I knew for a fact had been vacant for months, pending renovation. It wasn't loud, just a series of soft, irregular taps. Top, 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 top. Like someone was gently testing the wall, mapping it out. Sometimes it seemed to follow me. If I moved from the couch to my desk near that wall, the tapping would shift location too, always seeming to come from just the other side of wherever I was. Sleep became difficult. I started leaving headphones on, playing white noise, but the phantom taps and scratches seemed to burrow underneath the sound, lodging themselves in my subconscious. I began to feel perpetually watched, even inside my own locked apartment. One night, the scratching at the door returned, more insistent this time. Scrape, scrape, scritch, followed by a low, guttural whisper, muffled by the thick wood. I couldn't make out words, just a sibilant, breathy sound that prickled my skin. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. Should I call the police? What would I say? Someone's whispering and scratching my door? They'd laugh me off. Instead, I crept to the peephole. The fisheye lens showed the empty, familiar hallway, bathed in the sickly yellow light from the emergency fixtures. Nothing there. But the scratching continued, seemingly coming from the very bottom edge of the door. I stayed at the peephole watching for nearly 10 minutes. The scratching persisted, sometimes accompanied by that awful whisper. Yet, the hallway remained empty. It was like whatever was making the noise was invisible, or maybe crouched so low I couldn't see it. Finally, the sound stopped. Silence descended again, heavy and absolute. I didn't sleep at all that night, sitting on my couch, staring at the door until dawn. The next day, I found faint scratch marks on the bottom edge of the door, near the threshold, deep enough to have splintered the paint. Real physical marks. Someone or something had been there. The following night was quiet.
No scratches, no taps.
The silence felt like a taunt. I found myself straining to hear something, anything. Around 3 a.m., I was drifting into an uneasy sleep on the couch when my phone, sitting on the coffee table, lit up. Not a call, not a notification, just the screen illuminating silently. And on the lock screen, where the time should be, was a single word: listen. As I stared at the phone, bewildered, a sound came from the kitchen. A soft, metallic clink, like a utensil being gently tapped against the sink. I wasn't in the kitchen. I lived alone. I grabbed the heaviest object nearby, a cast iron skillet I sometimes used as a doorstop, and crept towards the kitchen doorway. The light from the living room spilled partially into the dark space. I could see the sink, the counters, the window looking out onto the fire escape. Empty. Then, another clink. It came from inside the undersink cabinet. The cabinet door was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it like that. Holding the skillet like a weapon, I used my foot to nudge the cabinet door further open. Darkness inside. I flicked on the kitchen light. The cabinet held the usual cleaning supplies, pipes, and something else. Tucked behind the U-bend, almost hidden, was a small, old-fashioned tape recorder. The kind with miniature cassette tapes. And the record button was pressed down. Suddenly, I heard a floorboard creak behind me. In the living room I had just left. I spun around, skillet raised. Nothing, but the front door of my apartment, the one I had been staring at all night, the one I knew was locked and deadbolt, was now standing wide open, revealing the empty, yellow-lit hallway beyond. It hadn't been trying to get in. It had already been inside, listening, recording. What was on that tape? And how did it open the deadbolt door from the inside without making a sound? I didn't stay to find out. I ran out the open door, down the stairs, and onto the street. I called the police from a block away. They found the apartment empty, the tape recorder wiped clean, the front door unlocked. No signs of forced entry, no explanation. I broke my lease the next day. I live somewhere else now, somewhere noisy, with paper-thin walls where I can hear my neighbors breathing. Sometimes I think the noise is better, because the worst sound I know now is the sound of stillness, and wondering who might be listening. Moving into the top-floor apartment of the old converted Victorian house seemed like a steal. Rent was cheap for the area, it had decent character, and the landlord, Mr. Henderson, lived off-site and seemed pretty hands-off. The only drawback was the layout. My apartment shared a long, thin wall with the only other unit on the floor, apartment 3B. Mr. Henderson had mumbled something about the tenant there being reclusive and keeping odd hours, but assured me they were quiet. For the first week, it was true. Blissful silence. Then the noises started. Not loud, initially, just odd. Late at night, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., I'd hear faint scraping sounds coming through the shared wall, like furniture being dragged slowly across a wooden floor, but softer, more hesitant. Sometimes there'd be a series of soft thuds, rhythmic and dull. I tried to ignore it. Old houses make noises. Maybe my neighbor was a night owl, an artist, a hobbyist. But the sounds had a weird quality, muffled and indistinct, yet somehow unsettling. They never sounded like normal activity. One night, I heard what sounded distinctly like soft, irregular tapping, almost like Morse code, coming from a spot on the wall near my bedroom. I pressed my ear against the cool plaster, listening intently. The tapping stopped abruptly, as if whoever was making it knew I was listening. A chill went down my spine. I never saw the occupant of 3B. Packages addressed to A. Marlowe would sometimes appear outside their door, simple brown boxes with no return addresses, and they'd be gone by the next morning. Occasionally, usually late at night, I'd hear their door creak open and shut, followed by slow, shuffling footsteps in the hallway, but I never managed to catch a glimpse of them if I looked through my peephole. The hallway always seemed empty seconds later. The sounds escalated gradually. The scraping became more frantic sometimes. I started hearing what might have been muffled vocalizations, not words, more like low groans or drawn-out sighs, barely audible through the plaster and lath. And then there was the smell. A faint, intermittent odor started seeping into my apartment, usually noticeable near the shared wall. It was vaguely metallic, like old pennies, mixed with something else, something cloyingly sweet and musty, like decaying flowers. My curiosity warred with my fear. Mr. Henderson didn't answer his phone when I tried calling to ask about the neighbor. I started losing sleep, lying awake, listening to the unsettling symphony from next door. Was Marlowe sick? In trouble? Or was it something else? The sounds didn't feel like someone suffering. They felt purposeful, secretive. One Saturday afternoon, driven by a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity, I decided to knock. I stood outside 3B, the strange metallic sweet smell stronger here. I knocked firmly. Silence. I knocked again, louder. Hello? Is everything all right in there? From inside, very close to the door, I heard a sudden, sharp intake of breath. It was so close, so clear, it sounded like someone had been standing right behind the door the whole time, listening. Then absolute silence again. No footsteps, no shuffling, nothing. Just the unnerving feeling of being observed from the other side of the wood. I backed away slowly and retreated into my apartment, my heart pounding. That night was the worst. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud bang against the shared wall, right behind my headboard. It sounded like someone had slammed their fist, hard, against the plaster. I sat bolt upright in bed, frozen. Then came the scraping, loud, frantic, desperate, moving rapidly along the base of the wall. It was followed by a series of heavy, wet thuds. And then silence. A deeper, more absolute silence than ever before. The silence continued for days. No scraping, no thuds, no shuffling in the hall. The packages stopped appearing outside 3B. The strange smell faded. It was as if the apartment next door had simply ceased to exist. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. The absence of the familiar, unsettling noises was somehow more disturbing than their presence. I couldn't take it anymore. I called Mr. Henderson again, and this time he picked up. I told him about the noises, the smell, the bang against the wall, and the sudden silence. He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed heavily. Alistair Marlowe, yes. Reclusive. He paused. Look, I haven't received rent from 3B in 2 months. The check I got last month bounced. I was going to give him another week before starting eviction proceedings. Another pause. You haven't seen him at all? For days. No, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Not seen, not heard. Nothing. All right, Mr. Henderson said, his voice suddenly tight. Don't go near the apartment. I'll come by with the master key this evening. Around 7. He arrived looking pale and nervous. We stood outside 3B. He knocked, called out Marlowe's name. No response. He slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit us first, overpowering now, the metallic tang mixed with rot. The apartment was dim, curtains drawn. What little light came from the hallway revealed chaos, furniture overturned, Dark stains splattered on the floor and walls, and the shared wall sections of the plaster had been crudely torn away, exposing the lath underneath. Scratch marks, deep and frantic, covered the remaining plaster and the exposed wood. It looked like someone or something had been desperately trying to claw through the wall. There was no sign of Alistair Marlowe, just the wreckage, the smell, and the terrifying gouges in the wall that separated his world from mine. Mr. Henderson called the police. I moved out a week later, breaking my lease. I never found out what happened to Marlowe, or what exactly was making those noises between our walls. But sometimes, late at night in my new place, I think I hear faint scraping sounds, and I pray it's just the old pipes. It started on a niche forum for retro game enthusiasts. I was looking for tips on repairing an old console, and Arcade Archivist 88 responded. Their advice was spot on, detailed, and helpful. We struck up a conversation via private messages, shared nostalgia, technical tips, the usual online camaraderie. They were cagey about personal details, which is normal online, just mentioning they also lived in a major city on the East Coast. Same as me. The messages became more frequent. Arcade Archivist 88, or AA as they signed off, seemed to be online at all hours. Their messages were always intelligent, witty, but sometimes off. They'd occasionally reference things with uncanny accuracy. "Hope that project deadline isn't stressing you too much," they messaged one day, when I hadn't mentioned work stress on the forum. "Must be nice seeing the cherry blossoms from your window." They sent another time, right when the trees outside my specific apartment building, visible only from certain units, were in full bloom. I asked how they knew these things. AA would deflect, saying things like, "Just a lucky guess," or "You mentioned something similar a while back," even though I knew I hadn't. Unease began to replace camaraderie. I slowed down my replies, hoping they'd take the hint. They didn't. The messages became more insistent. If I didn't reply for a few hours, I'd get a string of them. "Everything okay? Just checking in." Saw a great article about obscure topic I was interested in. Thought of you. Then they started referencing things happening in real time. "Loud sirens near you tonight. Looks like rain starting on your side of town." This wasn't guesswork anymore. They had to know where I lived, or at least my general location and habits. How? I hadn't shared my address, my full name, or any identifiable photos. I checked my forum profile, minimal info. My linked email was a throwaway account. I decided to block them. I clicked Block User on the forum. A confirmation popped up. User Arcade Archivist 88 blocked. Relief washed over me. Less than 5 minutes later, an email arrived in my personal inbox, the one not linked to the forum. The sender, Arcade Archivist 88 at protonmail.com. The subject line, "Did you mean to do that?" The body of the email contained only a single sentence. "Blocking isn't really effective, is it?" Panic set in. How did they get my personal email? I never used it for the forum. Had I slipped up somewhere? Mentioned a unique detail that could be traced? I ran virus scans, checked account security settings, found nothing compromised. I didn't reply to the email. I shut down my computer, but the feeling of being watched, of being digitally exposed, was suffocating. The next day, things escalated. A notification popped up on my phone from a food delivery app, one rarely used. "Your order from Luigi's Pizza is on its way. Estimated arrival, 20 minutes. I hadn't ordered anything. I checked the app. An order for a large pepperoni pizza, my usual preference, paid for, was indeed heading to my address. I frantically tried to cancel it, but it was too late. The delivery driver buzzed my apartment. Through the intercom, I told him I hadn't ordered it, that it must be a mistake. He sounded confused, said the name and apartment number matched, and that the order included a specific instruction. "Leave at door. Recipient will collect shortly. Please confirm delivery via text." Whose number would it text? I refused the delivery. As I watched the confused driver leave through my peephole, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Pepperoni getting cold. Shame. I felt sick. This wasn't just online anymore. Whoever they were, could manipulate things in the real world. Order food to my address, know my preferences, maybe even spoof text messages. What else could they do? That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building sounded like an intruder. Every notification chime made me jump. Around 3 a.m., my smart speaker in the living room, which I primarily used for music, suddenly activated. Its light ring turned blue. Playing your favorite station. It announced cheerfully, before starting to play a low, discordant static sound, occasionally punctuated by what sounded like distorted whispers. I unplugged it immediately. The final straw came the next morning. Pinned to my apartment door was a single Polaroid photograph. It showed the inside of my living room, taken from a high angle near the ceiling, looking down at my couch and coffee table. The room was empty, dimly lit, clearly taken at night. And in the corner of the photo, written in shaky black marker, were 2 letters, AA. Someone had been inside my apartment while I slept. How else could that photo exist? Had they picked the lock? Found a spare key? Were they still here? I didn't even go back inside. I ran down the stairs, out of the building, and went straight to the police. They took a report, listened sympathetically, but admitted that without more concrete evidence, tracking someone using an encrypted email and burner numbers who hadn't yet made a direct physical threat was incredibly difficult. They suggested changing locks, improving digital security, being vigilant. I did all that, moved apartments, changed my number, scrubbed my online presence as much as possible. I haven't heard from Arcade Archivist 88 since, but I can't shake the feeling of vulnerability. How easily the digital wall crumbled. How little protection there is when someone decides they want to reach through the screen and touch your life. Sometimes, I see an unfamiliar email address or get a random wrong number text, and the cold dread returns. Maybe they just got bored. Or maybe they're just waiting, watching from some new digital vantage point until they decide to send another message. Taking the late bus home was always a bit depressing. After finishing my closing shift at the diner, usually around 1 a.m., the number 14 was my only option besides a pricey cab ride. It ran a long, meandering route through deserted industrial parks and quiet residential streets before finally dropping me a few blocks from my apartment. Most nights, it was just me, the weary driver, and maybe 1 or 2 other souls too tired to acknowledge each other. It was on one of these rides, maybe the 3rd week of November, that I first noticed him. The bus had pulled up to a stop near the old textile mill, a place long since abandoned, surrounded by crumbling chain-link fences. Under the flickering orange glow of the single working street lamp nearby, I saw a man standing just beyond the pool of light. He was mostly in shadow, wearing dark clothing, and standing unnaturally still. What struck me was his posture rigid, facing the bus, though I couldn't make out his features. When the bus pulled away, I glanced back, and he was gone, or maybe just swallowed by the darkness again. Weird, but easily dismissed. A few nights later, same stop, same time. There he was again. Same spot, same stillness, same dark clothing. This time, I felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't illegal to stand on a street corner, but it was odd. So late in such a deserted area twice in 1 week. I kept watching as the bus drove off. He didn't move until the bus rounded the corner. The following week, it happened again. Textile mill stop. The figure in the dark. Now I was actively looking for him. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. Was he waiting for someone? Or waiting for this specific bus? Was he watching me? I started paying more attention to the other stops. And that's when the real dread set in. He wasn't just at the textile mill stop anymore. 2 nights later, I saw him at the next stop along the route, the one by the defunct auto body shop. Again, just outside the main light, standing perfectly still, facing the bus. My heart hammered. How did he get there? The bus was the only thing moving on these streets. It became a horrifying pattern. Every couple of nights, he'd be there, but at a stop progressively closer to my own. Textile mill, auto body shop, the corner by the boarded-up laundromat, the entrance to the overgrown city park. Always the same shadowy figure, always motionless, always seeming to watch the bus pass. I started to feel hunted. I tried switching seats, sitting further back, hoping maybe he wouldn't see me. It made no difference. There he'd be, a silent sentinel marking stages of my journey home. I considered telling the driver, but what could I say? There's a guy standing on the street corner, looking creepy. He'd think I was nuts. I thought about taking a cab, but I honestly couldn't afford it every night. One night, after seeing him at the park entrance stop, just 3 away from mine, I was almost paralyzed with fear. My stop was next. The bus hissed to a halt at my corner. The doors opened onto the familiar, dimly lit street. I scanned the area frantically. Nothing, just empty sidewalks and dark houses. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I practically ran the few blocks home, fumbling with my keys, heart pounding. I slammed the door shut, locked it, bolted it, leaned against it, gasping for breath. Safe. I was safe. I went into the kitchen to get some water, my hands still shaking. My kitchen window looks out onto the small alleyway that runs behind my building. As I stood at the sink, a flicker of movement outside caught my eye. I froze. Under the weak glow of the security light attached to the neighboring building, standing at the mouth of the alleyway, was the figure. Unmoving, cloaked in shadow, but unmistakably him. He wasn't on the bus route anymore. He was here. He knew where I lived. I stumbled back from the window, out of sight, crouching down behind the counter. How long had he been there? Had he followed me from the bus stop? Or had he somehow gotten here before me? The silence in my apartment was terrifying. Was he coming to the door? The window? I stayed there, huddled on the kitchen floor, for what felt like hours. Eventually, the first hints of dawn started to filter through the blinds. Mustering every ounce of courage, I crept back to the window and peeked out. The alleyway was empty. I haven't taken the late bus since. I walk the extra mile to the 24-hour train station now, even though it costs more and takes longer. I need the lights, the people, the noise. But sometimes, when I'm walking home from the station, down familiar streets, I see a shadow in a doorway or a figure standing just beyond a streetlight's reach. And I can't help but wonder, was it just one man? Or are there more of them, waiting in the quiet places, watching the lonely routes home? Renting a room in Mrs. Gable's sprawling, slightly dilapidated Victorian house seemed like a good deal. She was an elderly widow who used only the ground floor, renting out the upstairs rooms individually to save on upkeep. The rooms were large, the rent low, but the place had an atmosphere. And the walls were thin, paper thin. I shared a wall with the tenant in room 7, a guy I rarely saw, named Mr. Silas, according to Mrs. Gable. Keeps to himself, she'd said with a dismissive wave. Pays his rent on time. Keeps to himself was an understatement. I never saw Mr. Silas enter or leave. His door remained perpetually closed. But I heard him, or rather I heard things. Through the thin partition separating our rooms, sounds bled through easily. At first, it was just muffled coughing fits, deep and rattling, always late at night. Then came the dragging sounds, like heavy furniture being painstakingly moved inches at a time across a bare wooden floor. This would often be followed by a series of soft, rhythmic thuds against the shared wall. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't loud enough to complain about, just persistently weird. I started noticing other things. A strange, metallic smell, like rust and stagnant water, would sometimes waft under my door from the hallway, seemingly originating from near his room. Packages would arrive for him, small, heavy boxes wrapped in plain brown paper, left outside his door by delivery drivers. They'd sit there for a day, sometimes two, before disappearing silently overnight. My curiosity grew, tinged with unease. Who was this guy? What was he doing in there? I tried making polite conversation the few times I heard movement near his door as I passed in the hall, but my hello was always met with silence, maybe the soft click of an extra lock engaging on his side. One night, the sounds changed. Instead of coughing or thudding, I heard what sounded like whimpering, low, pathetic, animal-like whimpers, interspersed with that same dragging sound. It went on for almost an hour, making my skin crawl. Was he hurt? Did he have a pet I didn't know about that was suffering? I almost knocked, almost called Mrs. Gable, but a sense of deep-seated wrongness held me back. This didn't feel like something I should interfere with. A few days later, the metallic smell was stronger than ever, and now it was mixed with something else, a sickly sweet odor like overripe fruit. It clung to the hallway air. That evening, as I was heading out, I saw Mrs. Gable talking to a police officer near the front door. She looked pale and distressed. When the officer left, I cautiously asked her if everything was all right. She hesitated, wringing her hands. It's Mr. Silas, dear," she said, her voice trembling. "Haven't seen him in days. Rent was due. The smell. I used my key. Oh, it was awful." She wouldn't elaborate, just kept shaking her head, saying the police were handling it. They had sealed his room. I went up to my room, deeply disturbed. What had she found? What was the smell? The sealed door of room 7 seemed to pulse with menace. That night, sleep was impossible. The silence from the other side of the wall was somehow worse than the noises had been. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, a faint scratching sound, coming from the shared wall. My side, near the baseboard. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. My blood ran cold. Room 7 was empty, sealed by police. Nothing should be making noise in there. Yet, the scratching continued, slow, deliberate, seeming to test the plaster. Then came a soft thump against the wall, right behind my bed, followed by another, and another, the same rhythmic thudding I used to hear from his side. But now, somehow, it felt like it was inside the wall itself, or trying to get through. I didn't scream. I couldn't move. I just lay there, rigid, listening to the soft thuds vibrating through the wall, through my mattress. It felt like something was patiently, methodically trying to break down the thin partition between worlds. Suddenly, a sliver of plaster near the baseboard, right where the scratching had been, detached and fell to the floor with a soft click. Darkness showed through the small hole, and from that hole, a gust of air puffed out cold, carrying that same awful metallic sweet smell of decay. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my phone and keys, and fled the room, fled the house. I didn't look back at the hole in the wall. I didn't want to see if something was looking out. I called Mrs. Gable from a nearby 24-hour diner, told her what happened. She sounded resigned, exhausted. "The police found him, dear," she finally admitted. "Mr. Silas, in pieces, in boxes, the ones that were delivered." She didn't say anything else. I never went back for my things. Whatever was left of Mr. Silas, whatever he was doing, whatever answered from the other side of that wall, it wasn't gone just because the room was sealed. Some partitions are thinner than others, and some things are always listening, just waiting for a crack to appear. My life runs on routine. Maybe it's the programmer in me, maybe it's just comfort, but I thrive on predictability. Same coffee shop, same route to the office, same podcast during the commute, same lunch spot. It's a small, controlled loop in a chaotic world. Or it was until the loop started glitching. It began with the coffee shop, the daily grind. One Tuesday morning, I walked up, and the familiar forest green awning was bright, almost garish orange. Not just faded, a completely different, vibrant color. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. Had they renovated overnight? But inside, everything looked identical. Same barista, same pastries, same worn wooden counter. I hesitated, then went in. The barista, Chloe, greeted me with her usual smile. "Morning. The usual?" she asked. I nodded numbly. "Is the awning new?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She gave me a puzzled look. "Awning? It's always been green. Are you feeling okay?" I mumbled something about the light, paid for my coffee, and left, glancing back. The awning was green again. Deep, familiar forest green. I shook my head, blaming lack of sleep. But the next day, walking down Elm Street on my usual route, the old bookstore on the corner, Pages Past, had a different name painted above the door, Crimson Reeds. The font was the same, the placement identical, but the name was wrong. I stared, heart starting to pound. I pulled out my phone, searched for Crimson Reeds on that street. No results. Searched for Pages Past. There it was, listed at this exact address. I looked up again. The sign read Pages Past. These weren't just momentary hallucinations. Were they? They felt too solid, too real in the moment. It was like reality flickered, showing me an alternate version for a second before snapping back. The glitches became more frequent, more personal. On the subway, the digital display showing the next station momentarily flashed Cyrillic script instead of English. The usual homeless man I passed near the office, the one with the gray beard and the tartan blanket, one afternoon had piercing blue eyes instead of his usual brown. Just for the instant our gazes met. My office keycard, which usually beeped once, started emitting 2 quick beeps some days, but not others. Each incident was small, deniable in isolation. But the pattern was undeniable. Something was wrong with my routine or my perception of it. I started documenting everything in a small notebook, noting the time, place, and the specific deviation. The list grew disturbingly quickly. One evening, leaving the office, I got into the elevator. Usually, it's just me heading down from the 14th floor at that hour. The doors slid shut, the familiar chime sounded, and we started descending. Then, the elevator stopped abruptly at the 10th floor. The doors opened. Nobody was there. Just the empty, dimly lit corridor of the 10th floor, identical to every other floor. But pinned to the bulletin board directly opposite the elevator was a single sheet of paper that wasn't usually there. It looked like a child's drawing, crayon on construction paper. It depicted a stick figure with wide, panicked eyes, standing inside a box, with jagged lines pressing in from all sides. Underneath, in messy block letters, it read, "Let me out." The elevator doors slid shut before I could react further. It continued its descent as if nothing had happened. When I got to the lobby, I asked the security guard, Mike, if anyone from the 10th floor had been working late or if he'd seen anything unusual. He frowned. 10th floor? That floor's been vacant for renovations for the past month. Mate, completely stripped out. Nobody's been up there. My blood turned to ice. Vacant? Then who, what put that drawing there? Was it meant for me? The glitches intensified after that. My reflection lagging in shop windows. Streetlights flickering off just as I passed underneath them. The podcast I listened to suddenly inserting a single word of static or a nonsensical phrase that didn't belong. It felt like the world was trying to communicate, sending corrupted data packets into my reality stream. The breaking point came last Friday. I was walking home, notebook clutched in my hand, obsessively scanning for deviations. I turned onto my street and stopped. It wasn't my street. The houses were similar Victorian style, but the colors were wrong, the gardens different, the numbers on the doors didn't match. Even the trees lining the pavement seemed subtly altered. It was like a badly rendered copy of my neighborhood. I spun around, looking back the way I came. That street looked wrong too. Panic seized me. I was lost, adrift in this slightly off reality. I pulled out my phone to check the map. No signal. Searching. The screen flickered. For a horrifying second, the background image wasn't my usual photo, but that child's drawing from the elevator. Let me out. Then the screen went black. I looked up, heart pounding. The street was shifting, houses flickering between the familiar and the alien. The sky seemed too dark. A figure emerged from the distorted porch of a house that should have been mine. It looked vaguely human, but its proportions were wrong, elongated, its movements jerky like a broken animation. It turned its head towards me, and even from a distance, I could see its face was a blur, a smudge where features should be. It started moving towards me, not walking, but drifting, across the flickering pavement. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, blindly, away from the street that wasn't mine, away from the figure that wasn't human. I ran until my lungs burned, until the familiar world seemed to solidify around me again. The right street names, the right house colors. I made it back to my apartment, locked myself in. I haven't left since. I keep the curtains drawn. I don't trust the routine anymore. I don't trust the world outside. The glitches might have stopped for now, but I know that other version, the wrong version, is still out there, bleeding through at the edges. And I saw its inhabitant. What happens if the pattern deviates so much that I can't find my way back? What if I'm already trapped in the wrong loop? Thrift stores are my weakness, not for clothes or furniture, but for the forgotten detritus, old photos, weird knickknacks, things that whisper of past lives. It was in a dusty corner of a Salvation Army, buried in a box of tangled costume jewelry, that I found the locket. It was heart-shaped, tarnished silver, surprisingly heavy. No chain. The clasp was stiff, but I managed to pry it open. Inside weren't the expected portraits of smiling ancestors. On one side was a miniature, sepia-toned photograph of a single, unblinking eye staring directly out. It was startlingly detailed, unnervingly realistic. The other side held a tiny, dried, pressed flower, dark and brittle, unrecognizable. There was something compellingly morbid about it. For $2, I couldn't resist. I took it home, cleaned the tarnish off with some polish. The silver gleamed, but the eye inside seemed darker, more intense now. I put the locket on my bedside table, intending to find a chain for it later. That night, I had the first nightmare. I dreamt I was in a vast, dark room, and countless eyes were watching me from the shadows, all identical to the one in the locket. I woke up sweating, heart racing. Coincidence, I told myself, but the nightmares persisted, variations on the theme of being watched by that single, intense eye. During the day, I started feeling uneasy in my own apartment. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, turn, and find nothing. Objects seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking, a book tilted on the shelf, a mug closer to the edge of the counter than I remembered leaving it. And I kept noticing the locket. It seemed prominent. No matter where I put it on the cluttered bedside table, my gaze seemed drawn to it. Sometimes, I'd swear the tiny pressed flower inside looked different, less brittle, almost fresh. Other times, the eye seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. Impossible, of course. A trick of light on the curved photo surface. Then, small things started going wrong. My computer crashed, losing an important file. A package I was expecting got lost in the mail. I tripped on a perfectly flat pavement, badly twisting my ankle. Minor annoyances, but they piled up, starting the day after I brought the locket home. A cloud of low-grade misfortune seemed to hang over me. One evening, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling, I was watching TV. The locket sat on the coffee table. Suddenly, the TV fizzled, the image dissolving into static. And from the static, clear as day, came a single soft whisper that sounded like it was right beside me. Mine. The TV screen went black. The power hadn't gone out, just the TV had died. That was it. This locket, it wasn't just creepy. It felt malevolent. I decided I had to get rid of it. I snatched it up, the metal felt unnaturally cold, and marched outside to the dumpster behind my building. I threw it in, hearing it clink against other trash. I felt an immediate sense of relief, like a weight lifting. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in days.
No nightmares.
In the morning, feeling lighter, I went to make coffee. As I reached for my usual mug, my hand froze. Sitting on the kitchen counter right next to the coffee maker was the locket. Gleaming silver, closed. My blood ran cold. How? I lived alone. The doors were locked. Had I imagined throwing it away? No, I distinctly remembered the cold metal, the clink in the dumpster. Had someone retrieved it and put it here? Why? I grabbed the locket again, a wave of nausea washing over me. This time, I wouldn't just throw it away. I took it out to the nearby park, found a secluded spot near the river, and threw it as hard as I could into the water. It vanished with a small splash. Gone for good this time, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. If anything, it intensified. The glitches in my apartment continued, and the nightmares returned worse than before. Now, in the dreams, the eyes weren't just watching. They were weeping dark, viscous tears, and the whispering sound filled the air, incomprehensible but full of menace. 2 days after throwing the locket in the river, I woke up to a tapping sound. Not at the window, not at the door. It was coming from inside my bedroom closet. Slow, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I lay frozen, listening. It stopped. Silence. Then, tap, tap, tap. Closer now, as if whatever was inside was moving towards the door. I didn't own anything that could make that noise. With trembling hands, I reached for the lamp, flicked it on. The tapping stopped instantly. I stared at the closet door, heart hammering. Should I open it, or should I run? As I debated, something slid under the closet door from the inside. Slowly, deliberately, it came to rest on the carpet in the thin strip of light from the hallway. It was the locket, tarnished again with bits of river mud clinging to it. And it was open. The single I stared up at me, and the pressed flower was gone. In its place, nestled against the tarnished silver, was a small, freshly snipped lock of my own hair. I screamed. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my keys and phone, and ran out of the apartment, out of the building, into the pre-dawn chill. I haven't been back. I don't know what was in the closet, or how the locket returned, or how it got my hair. All I know is that it's not just a keepsake anymore. It's a claim, and it doesn't like to be abandoned. Working the closing shift at the university library wasn't exactly thrilling, but it was quiet, paid okay, and let me study during the downtime. Usually, by 10 p.m., the place was a ghost town except for me, maybe 1 or 2 desperate undergrads cramming in the study carrels, and Janice, the head librarian, who locked up the main entrance before heading home around 11, leaving me to finish straightening shelves and shut down the computers before letting myself out the staff exit at midnight. This particular Tuesday was even quieter than usual. Mid-semester lull, maybe. By 10:30, I was completely alone. Janice had wished me a good night and locked the heavy main doors. The only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights, the ticking of the large clock over the circulation desk, and my own footsteps echoing slightly in the vast, silent space. I was in the periodical section on the second floor, organizing recent journals. It was a corner section, surrounded by tall shelves, feeling particularly isolated. That's when I heard it, a distinct thud from downstairs, near the main circulation desk area, like a heavy book falling flat on the carpeted floor. My first thought was Janice had forgotten something and come back, but I hadn't heard the main doors unlock or open, and the sound was singular, abrupt. I called out, "Janice? Is that you?" Silence. Only the gentle hum of the lights answered. Okay, maybe a book had just fallen off a cart or shelf. Old building, vibrations, gravity. Happens. Still, a prickle of unease ran down my spine. I decided to finish up quickly and head downstairs. As I walked towards the main staircase, I passed the row of small, glass-walled study rooms. They were all dark, empty, except in the reflection of the glass wall of the last room. For just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw movement behind me, further down the aisle I had just walked. A flicker of shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness between the bookshelves. I spun around. Nothing. Just rows upon rows of silent books. "Hello!" I called out again, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. No reply. Now I was properly spooked. Forget straightening shelves. I headed straight for the stairs. As my foot hit the first step down, I heard another sound. A soft click. It came from the first floor, near the staff offices behind the circulation desk, like a door handle being turned slowly, carefully, trying not to make noise. My heart leaped into my throat. Someone was inside the library. Someone who shouldn't be. Had they hidden somewhere before Janice locked up? My mind raced. The staff exit was on the first floor, past the circulation desk, past the offices. Whoever was down there was between me and my only way out. The main doors were locked from the outside. The windows were barred or sealed. I was trapped on the second floor. Panic started to set in. Think, where to hide? The study rooms had glass walls, useless. Under a table, too exposed. Then I remembered the rare books room. It was at the far end of the second floor. Solid oak door, heavy-duty lock. Janice kept the key on the main circulation desk downstairs, but there was an emergency override key hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace of the adjacent reading room. A quirk I only knew from a boring training session. Trying to stay silent, I crept towards the reading room. The large, empty room felt ominous. I fumbled behind the loose brick, my fingers closing around the cold, heavy key. Relief warred with terror. Just as I pulled the key out, I heard footsteps. Soft, stealthy footsteps coming up the main staircase. They knew I was up here. Clutching the key, I ran, heart pounding, across the reading room towards the rare books door. I jammed the key into the lock, fumbling, hands shaking. The footsteps were closer now, reaching the top of the stairs, entering the main second floor area. The lock finally clicked open. I slipped inside the rare books room, pulled the heavy door shut, and twisted the deadbolt. Safe? Maybe. The room was pitch black, smelling of old paper and leather. There were no windows. I pressed my ear against the thick wood. I could hear the footsteps approaching outside. Slow, deliberate. They stopped right outside the door. Silence. Had they heard the lock? Did they know I was in here? Minutes stretched into an eternity. I stood frozen, barely breathing, listening. Then, a soft, experimental scratching sound started on the outside of the door, like fingernails testing the wood. Scratch, pause, scratch, scratch. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just some opportunistic thief. This felt predatory. The scratching stopped. I heard a faint sigh right on the other side of the door. Then, the footsteps began to move away, retreating back towards the main area. Was it gone? Was it a trick? I stayed put, pressed against the door, listening. After what felt like half an hour of absolute silence, I risked cracking the door open just a sliver. The second floor lights were still on. The area outside the door was empty. Had they left? Given up? Or were they hiding, waiting? I had to get out. Staying locked in here all night wasn't an option. Maybe they'd gone downstairs, trying to find another way out or waiting near the staff exit. I eased the door open fully, peered out into the reading room. Empty. I crept towards the main area, scanning the aisles between the bookshelves. Empty. I moved towards the staircase, listening intently. Silence from downstairs. Maybe they had left. Maybe I could make a run for the staff exit now. I started down the stairs, taking each step as quietly as possible. Reaching the first floor, I peered around the corner towards the circulation desk and the staff offices. All seemed quiet, lights off in the offices. The staff exit was just beyond. I took a deep breath and started to move quickly, silently, across the open space towards the exit. I was halfway there when a floorboard creaked loudly above me. On the second floor, I froze, looking up towards the railing. A figure stood there, cloaked in the shadows between the ceiling lights, looking down at me. Tall, indistinct. It hadn't left. It had waited, and then it leaped, vaulting over the second floor railing, landing silently on the carpeted floor below, between me and the exit. It rose to its full height and started walking towards me, not fast, but with an unnerving, inevitable purpose. I didn't wait to see its face. I turned and sprinted back the way I came, not towards the stairs, but ducking into the maze of bookshelves in the main fiction section. I plunged into the darkness between the towering shelves, knocking books to the floor in my panic, trying to lose myself in the stacks. I could hear it following, moving with an unnatural speed and silence through the aisles behind me. This wasn't just a person. It was a hunter, and the library was its territory. Hiding wouldn't work for long. I needed to find another way out or another place to fight. My shift wasn't over. The horror was just beginning.